Announce the event of an amazing story with a fascinating world. The event gathers NPCs from all over the game world to become guides for adventurers, and their NPCs will be... The man lying on the bunk angrily shouted to the two guys to take better care of themselves. The young man said angrily that he was probably the only one who could laugh before he died. The crying boy stood behind the young man and tried to figure out if he was really that happy about this stupid game. The man started coughing up blood, but he smilingly pronounced that this was only the beginning, not the end. The young man ran up to him to wipe the blood and in a moment was agreeing with what he was saying. The man grabbed the young man by the arm and started forcing him to play the game, covering his mouth from blood and coughing. The man said they would see each other again, for the young man was his friend. The man began to close his eyes and tears came out. He was withdrawing from the world. The young man screamed for a doctor, but it was too late. The event has announced who their NPS will be. The NPCs will be people at death. Sun Nalinya remembers her colleague who put a lot of effort into her, and a fan of the game Lord of Heroes with respect writes Jinhan Wu. A man in blue overalls is standing in a field holding a sapka. He is diligently plowing the field. The protagonist scoops up the earth and lifts the sapka up, repeating this action over and over again. After working, the guy is very sweaty, but he's in a great mood and feels good. There is no limit to his joy, for his body is finally healthy and strong. The hero plowed the whole field with ease and it looks beautiful. Not far from the field is a beautiful village, his beginner's village. Miniature houses and a beautiful fountain. He likes this village. A man with a small smile on his face remembers that he is already dead. By the will of the deceased, his data was transferred to the game server. Now his life is an exciting story in the game world. They were sure that he would find happiness in this world. After all, he wanted it very much. The man's eyes were closed, but even through them a bright light shone through. When he opened his eyes, he couldn't believe it. He was scared for a second. He felt as if he were floating in the air. The man looked down. He was hanging in the air. It didn't seem to him. He tries to step and he succeeds. The protagonist is puzzled, but eventually a realization comes to him and a smirk appears on his face. He experienced something that was beyond his imagination. The man got to his feet. He couldn't convince himself that this was happening. The young man ran as fast as he could. A pleasant wave of joy came over him. Because of his illness, he had been bedridden for the past few years, and now he finally ran. He ran until he came upon a village of newcomers. A small rabbit stopped in front of him. The guy froze in bewilderment. In peaceful life, one may face trials. The hero whimpered, "For the rabbit is a crop thief." Still, he found the ordeal quite nice. Suddenly, a girl and a guy came up to him. They offered to help. After all, it was the player's first quest. The heroine asked the farmer to give them their first task. A farmer asked for help to get rid of rabbits. In return, he offered a sack of potatoes. They thought it was rather trivial. After listening to the farmer, the players decided to get to work and wished him a rich harvest. The farmer smiled, for he had an endless supply of potatoes. The qualifications of his NPS are an endless supply of potatoes. The man was leaving in a hurry, but managed to mention the uncorrected bug on the farm. The farmer promised to pass on the players' words. As he watched them grow distant, he realized that he was happy with this life, and perhaps it suited him just fine. As dusk falls, the NPS organizes various festivities, dancing, live music, and fun. When there are no players, everyone shares life stories and drinks with each other. My lady with pink hair said the farmer had a good memory. She looked very upset. The farmer looked at her with a bewildered face. The reason, she said, was that her memory was becoming more and more fuzzy each time, and she remembered almost nothing from the past. Mademoiselle couldn't remember how long the game lasted. The farmer didn't know what to say. Unfortunately, lately, more and more NRS are losing their memory. The farmer hesitantly said that it would be finalized later. He didn't know how to respond. Fully integrating into the game didn't sound bad, but the farmer didn't want to lose the memory of his life. Suddenly, the lady noticed the warrior. She wanted to know what he was doing here at this hour. A blonde-haired warrior with huge fangs warned menacingly that it was dangerous for newcomers in the village. The warrior shouted that they had to save themselves, to run away. The warrior himself looked very tense. The farmer asked, "Is this from the update?" In an instant, my eyes were obscured by a bright light. The newcomers' village was attacked. The fire has begun to spread. The farmer shouted that they had not been warned of the attack. The Surrey warrior replied that he was an NPS from Platinum City. There was too little time for discussion, but the farmer stood his ground. The protagonist knew that Platinum City was high level, and so he was confused. Surrey confirmed the farmer's words and said that the boss of their location would be there soon. The warrior tried to explain the situation to the farmer as quickly as possible. Surrey said, if the boss takes control of this location, they can't get out. There is no automatic resurrection now. If someone dies here, they won't come back. Suddenly, there was a thud. Surrey looked to his right and saw the shadow of a demon. The demon asked angrily who would have thought that losing his memory would lead to such consequences. Demon hinted that unforeseen circumstances happened in Lord of Heroes. The farmer was puzzled. He didn't understand how this could happen if it wasn't written in the story. Suri was ready to fight with all his might and stop the demon. The demon asked Suri why he was so persistent and what was the point of continuing to fight. The demon firmly said that this world was destined to be destroyed. The warrior said he wouldn't understand it anyway and raised his sword. The hero was not stopped by the demon's words. He was persistent. The warrior attacked him. He would not stop taking risks, for it was the only way out. People started to run away, but the farmer stood there trying to think of something. The farmer was not going to run away. He could not leave the others behind. The guy looked around, the fire developing at an incredible speed. The protagonist stood still and realized that everyone could be consumed by the raging flames. The farmer was horrified by what he saw. He wanted to do something, to help somehow. The main character shouted loud enough for everyone to hear that he knew a place to hide and told everyone to run to the village gate. People were hesitant. The farmer convinced them that there was a bug-out area to the left of the gate. They should run there. They could hide. A guy and a girl asked what the bug zone was. The man listened incredulously. Asti ran toward the battle. The heroine tried to understand why he was going there because there was a battle going on. The farmer replied that he must find that NPS, for he was fighting for everyone and could die. Miss shouted in the wake that it was dangerous, and if he went in there, he would be killed himself. Suri attacked Demon time after time, but his attacks were useless. The demon scoffed, for the warrior's strength was nothing compared to his powers. The battle continued, the demon winning and pinning the warrior to the ground. The demon looked straight into the warrior's eyes and asked with a sneer how exactly he was sent to erase the demon. It seemed very funny to him. Suri didn't understand how this was possible after all. They should be of the same level as him, and he couldn't do a single bit of damage to him. It was as if the warrior was fighting someone far above his level. The demon attacked the warrior sharply and knocked him back. Suri flew off into the trees and thundered to the ground. The whole forest and the village were on fire. The village was filled with fire faster and faster by the newcomer. Asti had been looking for him all this time and was nearby when he heard the rumble of a fall. The protagonist was horrified when he saw the wounded man. He was lying on the ground, barely moving. Asti ran up to him and asked himself, how could he have been hurt so badly? For a second, the protagonist thought he was too late. The warrior opened his eyes and asked the hero what he was doing here since Asti had to run away. The demon was looking for the warrior and threatened to kill him as soon as he found him. Asti heard the demon's screams and decided to run away. The protagonist explained to him that he couldn't just leave him, and so he came to help. Asti took him under his arm and convinced Suri that he knew where they could take refuge. Suri was desperate. He didn't believe that this low-level village was a safe haven. He told the protagonist to run away because he couldn't be saved anyway. Asti yelled at him to trust him. Suri was silent. He didn't know what to say, so he just went with him. The main character smiled. He affirmatively said that they wouldn't die here. The game contains a lot of content, so a lot of hard-to-fix bugs happen. Among them is the place where Asti decided to hide with Suri. One day, a young man found this bug and showed his friends. From that moment on, players started jumping there, and the total number of players who jumped was 3,000. Asti chose this particular bug because all the NPCs in the village could fit in there. He and Suri arrived at this place, but Suri thought there was nothing here as it was just an ordinary clearing. As soon as the warrior stepped, he began to fall down with the farmer. The guys were flying down and couldn't stop. Asti fell to the floor and bruised badly, but his attention was diverted by Suri. The warrior didn't know such places existed, so he was very surprised to see such a thing. Unexpectedly for the heroes, happy villagers came up to them and started thanking Asti for saving their lives. Suri was happy looking at this picture. He was even a little proud of the farmer. The good mood disappeared after the fighter heard the demon approaching. The demon looked angrily at the barrier but couldn't get inside. It was as if he sensed that someone was there, but something stopped him. The boss rose up and disappeared as if he never existed. Suri and Asti meshed. They stayed still so the demon wouldn't hear anything. The protagonist exhaled as the monster flew away, and the warrior was afraid to foreshadow what would happen next. The farmer asked Surin what had happened after all. The fighter asked if Asti knows that Krasny Lumbini is the final boss from the new update. Asti had a question. Did anyone complain of blurred memories of their life or no memory at all? The warrior said that this boss had the same thing happen, and his memories were gradually erased. Then, he became more and more convinced that he was Krasny Lumbini. In addition, the main goal of the final boss is to destroy this world. To fulfill his mission, Krasny escaped from the underground city. The farmer did not understand how this was possible. Suri said he forgot himself and followed the boss all the way to the newbie village. He realized he was obsessed with this task of guarding the boss. Asti didn't agree with his words. He didn't think that about him. On the contrary, he was proud of him. Before the warrior could say a word, he heard from the guy that you had to be very brave to take such a risk. Suri looked at him bewildered and did not understand why he was thanking him. Asti said the warrior saved him, saved the people of the village. The fighter didn't know what to say. All he did was object. Suri was silent for a moment, and then said that he should be the one to say such words. Asti was only a low-level NPS, but his bravery was something to be envied. The people began to support the warrior's words, and told Asti that if it had not been for him, they would not have thought of hiding here, and they might not be alive anymore. The man and the woman began to thank Asti for saving everyone. The farmer felt awkward, but he rather liked it. The hero looked at Suri. He only stood and smiled as if he knew Asti would become a true hero. After all, this was only the beginning of his story. After the villagers thanked Asti, the warrior also thanked him for his help. Surin had some unresolved business to attend to, so he was about to leave. Suddenly, the warrior felt sick and cried out in pain. The farmer shouted to him because he was afraid for him. Surin replied that apparently he had not yet recovered from his wounds and that he still needed time. Asti told the fighter that regeneration takes too long and he can help him. The farmer was serious, and so he began to look for a priest and a herbalist among the people. The priest and herbalist responded immediately, and he said he would give them potatoes. Asti was going to make a healing potion from holy water, herbs, and potatoes. Suri was skeptical of what the farmer was doing, but still waited for him to finish. The guy made a small potion rather quickly and looked at his work with a smile. Afterward, Asti approached the warrior and handed him jars of the potion, claiming it would restore his strength faster. Suri thanked him, but still didn't believe it could help. The fighter drank the potion, and his health was fully restored. He is now indebted to Asti. The farmer was glad, but Suri was getting ready to leave again, and he asked him why he was leaving. Wasn't it safer to wait here for the bugs to be fixed? The fighter explained to him that programming probably wouldn't solve anything because Krasny's level was higher than his, which confirmed that he couldn't do any damage, and Krasny almost killed him. Suri continued, if all the other monsters had changed like Krasny, then the problem was far more serious, and he should make sure of it. Asti was confused, for he did not know it could be so serious. He asked the warrior what they should do. Suri responded that they would be better off staying in the bug and waiting for the system detection to end. Milady asked what if they don't have time to wait for the system detection to finish, because it lasts at least 3 hours. The girl next to her offered to check how long they should expect to wait until the discovery was over. The system alert showed that communication with the outside world would be available in about 4.5 hours. All the people were upset, because 4 hours is a long time. Suddenly the numbers started to change, and more questions started to be asked. The figures have changed to 5 hours. The wait is even longer than everyone expected. Suri said that time has increased because apparently this problem is too difficult to solve in the outside world, and got ready to leave. Suri's main goal is to stop all of this. He must do his duty. The warrior says either he can wait for the system detection to end, or he can do what he can. He chooses the second option. Asti asks him what he's going to do when he is sure of everything. Suri will go in search of high-level NPCs, as his level is not increasing. He needs help. This is the only way he will be able to compete with Krasny. When the warrior went to help the newcomer village, he found that many of the high-level NPCs had died, and he had a hunch that maybe after some time they managed to resurrect. It's too hard to rely on assumptions, but Suri hoped they've come around. However, the fighter thinks that without knowing where exactly in the system the failure occurred, the NPCs may not come to their senses. He argues that it is too dangerous outside, and the level of the newcomers is not enough to go out and fight, so he insists that people stay in the bug. Suri's story was interrupted by a lady. The time counter had reached its maximum value and was not decreasing. Asti couldn't believe his ears. That's impossible. The farmer told the warrior that he would not wait here to die. He intends to go with Suri. Guy asks Suri to take him along. He wants to be useful in finding the NPS. The warrior said that the descendants of the newcomer village are great heroes, so the NPCs from this village are a symbol of bravery and courage. The path of the warrior begins with the newcomer village, and the children inherit valor and bravery. Suri asks Asti if he's really willing to take that step, or is it just a role setting by his NPS? The warrior doubts Asti, so he asks what he can do. He's only a level 1 NPC after all. The farmer was confused, but then an idea occurred to him. He decided to surprise Suri. Asti asked him if the warrior knew that to make a small cure potion to a rare item, you can't do without a certain material. You can't do without a certain material. Crops! The warrior didn't know what he was talking about, but still he listened, and perhaps the farmer managed to surprise him. Still seeing and remembering Asti's abilities in making a minor cure potion, Suri began to hesitate and recognized that he could be useful. Asti firmly said he had already made his decision and was not going to change it. One of the villagers asked the farmer if he had decided to go with the warrior after all. The guy replied that he is definitely going and added that although Suri is a warrior, he may have to his abilities. The fighter saw that the farmer was serious, but most likely his abilities were not enough. Suri said he really appreciated Asti's endless supply of fries, and that must have meant the guy was going with him. The farmer was incredibly happy and asked, So the warrior agreed to take him with him? He was ready to hear a positive answer. Suri had other plans. He firmly refused Asti, but had prepared something for him that might make the warrior reconsider his decision not to take him along. The fighter said that before they set off, he wants to test the farmer, as the NPC who can't even kill a chicken will be a burden to him. Suri has swept up that Asti is only level 1, and at that level has absolutely no hunting skills, meaning he will be useless if he has to go into battle. The warrior has the highest level and could protect the farmer, but he could use a higher level NPC. Suri asks that Asti raise his level to level, then he can definitely go with the warrior. The fighter said he hopes the farmer makes it before the moon rises and leaves the bug-out zone. Thanks to his highest level in martial arts skills, Suri is adept at jumping up and disappearing, but managing to tell Asti that he will be waiting for him in the newcomer village at the Statue of Heroes. Farmer shouts after Suri that he'll be able to raise the level. He can't wait to get started. The lady asks Asti if he really wants to go along with the warrior. The young man answers positively without hesitation, although it has not yet been decided whether he will go with Suri, but he is keen to try. The girl was confused by his quick answer. She asked him if it was safer to stay in the Buga. Asti said that since childhood he had health problems. He could not even play like all normal children. He just wanted a normal life, but unfortunately it did not happen. So with the help of games he made up for all that he lacked, for it was in the game world that he could go anywhere and achieve any goal. And who knew Asti could live this life and achieve everything he wanted? Suddenly, Asti was approached by a man. He said that Asti was very brave, not like him. Suddenly, the man shouted that he could give him a weapon and began to stretch his sweatshirt. Asti was dumbfounded by what he saw. Mr. Masterfully pulled out a sword from his jacket and said that it was the sword of the novice village. The farmer was very confused about where it was kept. The man laughed at his reaction and said that he just wanted to lighten the atmosphere, so he put it in such an unexpected place. He hopes he can use this weapon and hands it to Asti with dignity. The farmer is incredibly happy, because now he has his own weapon, which he will probably use in defense of himself and Suri. Suddenly, Asti was called by a priest. He said he was giving him a luck boost. This was not the end, for the priest gave him his herbs and empty vials, which would come in handy to make potions. Soon, the farmer was called by a lady and presented him with a sack, for it would come in very handy with so many items. The young man did not know what to say, for these things were very precious and important to him. Before he could say anything, a man approached Asti, saying that everyone would stay here, but if he needed anything, the farmer could find them at any time. The boy bowed and thanked everyone for their help. Now it was time to move on. Asti climbed out of the bug area. He was determined. Arriving at the hero's monument, he decided to start training because it is simply necessary to survive. Nearby watched Suri and mentally wondered if he could do it. At this time, Asti strongly implored that he was an NPS in this world, and if he became a warrior, then he would undoubtedly be a hero that legends would be written about. At the point he saw something, it looks like it is a hunting ground, and he will overcome all obstacles to do so. Asti was determined and ready to attack, because he needs to get pumped. He began to run. His readiness for battle was at its maximum. The farmer was approaching and was overflowing with energy. A deer stood in front of him. The incredibly beautiful girl wondered if Asti had taken over. How interesting. Asti came running very fast without stopping, approached the deer and stopped. The guy coughed up blood. He'd forgotten what it was like. Asti lay down on the ground and tears came out, because doing such tasks is very difficult. The lady who had been watching him all this time decided that this must be her way out and sprang into action. She gracefully flew out of the trees, called out to the farmer, and said she would help put him on the path of a warrior. The girl changed her appearance once and looked at Asti. Out of nowhere, Asti received a vial of minor potion. He drank it and felt much better. The lad realized that if this went on, he could not go with Suri and that he would rather be killed by the deer itself than by him. You bet he even asked the players to get rid of the rabbits. The lady asked him if he missed the tutorial when he was reborn in this game, because he should have entered the beginner mode. It was as if Asti realized right away that she was in charge of training the newcomers. The girl held his hand out to him and introduced herself as Leela. Leela really turned out to be the NPC in charge of training newcomers. Leela saw the farmer practicing hard and couldn't just stand by, so she decided to teach him how to fight. Asti admitted that he could use someone to teach him how to fight, but he had a question. How on earth did the girl get thrown in here from rookie mode? Leela replied, "Is it really that important right now?" She couldn't wait to get started. The NPS instructor jumped Asti from behind. She wanted to start his training and told him to pick up a sword. A doll from the tutorial appeared in front of the guy. With it, he will have his first fight, though not a real one. Leela began to tell me how to proceed. First, you have to choose a target. Then you have to click on his skill number and beat it! Asti is puzzled. He asks the girl how he should click. The girl laughed, all in the way she said it. Turns out she accidentally slapped a line from the tutorial. Leela said to just shout the word click. But even here, Asti had questions. The girl continued. If the farmer doesn't do well, he'll die. He thought that phrase was too cruel. But the guy realized that in some ways she was right, and he should try very hard because if nothing comes out, he will have to sit out in the village. Asti knew all he needed to do was reach level 2 and then he could go with Sure. The player mustered up courage and ran to strike. His morale was off the charts and he was unstoppable. The girl watched him and noticed that he was acting quite well and that he now had a combat skill to attack. Asti screamed as Leela commanded and cut off the doll's head. He felt the power in his hands. The impact came out so hard that even the deer took off. The player reasoned that it looked like this right-click skill would have to be used with caution, but he did as Leela said. The girl praised him, saying it was great. Leela was very happy to help Asti. She told him to look at the level he upgraded to a 2. The player was incredibly happy because he had finally succeeded, and all he had to do was yell, "Click!" Leela said that it's not really necessary to yell, but Asti is so cute. She's glad he was able to pass the test. The girl needed to leave for the village. Asti, getting a little frustrated, suggested she join them in their search for high-level NPCs. But Lilu has no business being with players who have already been trained, so their roads diverge. The girl left and Asti asked himself, and who could save Lord of Heroes after all? The moon has risen, which means time is up. But Asti has managed to raise the level. Perhaps Suri is still waiting for him. The warrior was really waiting for him. He started to worry if the farmer would come and thought that he couldn't reach level. But suddenly someone called out to him. It turned out to be Asti. He came in and there was a level 2 glow above him. The player happily pointed to the number and said he had done it. He described exactly how he did it, shouted right-click, and carried out the attack. Because that's your world too. When the knight entered the hall, someone was crying. It turned out to be a lord. He was sitting over the coffin and regretting that he couldn't save his daughter. The knight told him that his daughter had to be sent on her last journey. Lord didn't want to hear it. He hoped his daughter would come back to life. Who knows? Suddenly, his girl could be resurrected just like him. But other than the Lord, the knight had not heard of anyone who could do this. Suddenly, there was movement in the coffin. The Lord's daughter's hand began to move and run over her fingers. The girl began to scream loudly, sat up. Her eyes were bright purple in color, and she looked at her father with incredible anger, for she was going to attack him. Knight started to defend him, but she was probably able to get away. Asti has dealt with deer time after time. He is very happy that he is able to use this skill. Suri sees that the player is very excited. At this rate, by the time they get to ERV, he'll already be level 10. The warrior asks Asti, is he level 5 now? He doubts that he will be able to level up that often. The warrior and the player decide to go to a village called ERV. It is much bigger than the newcomer's village. There they will find basic equipment for Asti, as well as NPCs ready to fight. Suri thinks that in such a journey, the farmer will not have time to reach level. Asti realizes this is odd, since he's played Lord of Heroes for 30 characters and he should have reached level 8 a long time ago. The fighter explained that the player has no quests, and there are surprisingly few monsters, and added that maybe monsters can't regenerate either. There must not be many of them in the underground city anymore. Asti is confused. He didn't think there could be a problem with that. The warrior has a solution, as experience is also given for killing guards. Asti didn't like the decision after all. They are just like them, and were also human in a past life. Suri explained that if there is no other option, they will have to use this method, but there is no need right now. Suddenly, Asti had someone behind him. He wouldn't have noticed him if the warrior hadn't spoken up. It turned out to be a monster, but the farmer held his sword with confidence and was ready to fight. Asti is going to attack him. He will not allow a massacre between humans. He will kill all the monsters of Lord of Heroes. Suri stops a player as there is something wrong with that deer. Asti didn't realize that again. He couldn't let a single monster get away from him. The player asked, is it definitely a deer? After all, it looks intimidating and has bright purple eyes. It is indeed a deer, but not an ordinary one. Suri told Asti to step back. The warrior masterfully struck the monster. The deer rumbled so loudly that Asti thought Suri had been hurt too. Suri said that Krasny can turn creatures, so after resurrection they become a murder weapon. This deer must have been turned. Along with this, its level has increased. If Asti and Suri deal with this, they can capture the underground city of Krasny. The warrior thinks that now the deer's level is higher than the player's, but Asti thought it was just an ordinary deer. Events are taking a bad turn. Apparently ERV is more dangerous to them at the moment than they can imagine, Suri reasoned. Does that mean Irv's people are also converted? The warrior pointed off in the distance as if he heard someone there. The sound grew stronger and rougher, as if dozens of hooves were advancing on them. It turned out to be a deer, but not a regular deer, but one that was turned. Dozens of eyes looking at Asti and Suri. The monsters had gotten closer, and now the players were standing back to back because they were surrounded. Asti asked the warrior what they should do now. The answer was immediate. Prepare for battle. Suri told Asti if he dies, it's over. The converts began to attack. Their strength was tremendous. Asti didn't understand how this was possible. Can monsters level up too? But that didn't stop him. Let them attack. He would destroy them all. Suddenly, the farmer was called out by someone. The man flew straight at the monsters to fend off the attacks, and so told the farmer to watch out. An unknown warrior shouted at the top of his voice that there were survivors here and they needed to be rescued. He was not alone. There were 3 other men with him, and they promptly began to massacre the monsters. These warriors turned out to be knights from ERV. One of them asked if there were any wounded. The knight seemed to recognize the warrior and asked if he was Suri Lakrios. Suri were annoyed by the name finding out. After all, there is no time to exchange greetings now. You have to be ready for anything. Suddenly, a dark silhouette appeared in the sky and shouted ominously. It turned out to be Belisa, no longer the one the knights knew. Asti was puzzled, for he had not met this monster before. The knight explained that the monster was Lord Irv's daughter, Lady Belisa. The player didn't understand how it was. After all, when he was playing, he had met Lady Belisa, but she was very different. Suri reminded him of the deer. She had been turned just like the animals. Belisa pointed to everyone below, and as if mentally reciting a spell, dozens of bats flew down to destroy everyone. This made Suri very angry, and he pondered his options for a solution. The warrior pointed his weapon at the ground so that the force rebounded and went skyward. A bright light eclipsed everything around him. The force of his blow was so strong that everyone was thrown upward. The lady and her subordinates did not perceive light, and the blow itself brought pain. Monsters started to fly away, so the strike worked. It gives a little time. Asti confirmed that they had escaped. The knight was pleasantly surprised, for what Suri had done was amazing. All this time, Leela had been watching Suri. Due to the heavy accumulation of power, there was an imbalance. She realized that Suri Lakrios seemed to need to be cleaned up. Leela appeared and disappeared as if she never existed, but she managed to fix the problem. The warrior asked the knight how many people were converted. The knight replied that since Krazen left, there is a truly horrifying sight going on all around. Rose needs to know how to level up, so he asked the man if he has met any NPS that can level up. The knight was wary for some reason and said, "If you have met him, what do you want with him?" The fighter explained that Krasny's level is getting higher and higher, but Suri can't raise his own level, and he can't handle the boss alone. However, he met Asti. He can raise his level. Asti is diligently training, so the warrior took him along. But he alone is not enough. He needs more NPCs like the farmer, as their goal is to destroy Krasny. The knight was still standing tense and holding his sword, but the warrior calmed him down, saying he wasn't going to hurt anyone, and the man could lower his weapon. Suri's goal isn't fighting knights at all. He wants to eradicate evil. The knights of ERV have agreed to guide Suri and Asti to ERV. They have a long journey ahead of them. The whole team arrived at dawn. ERV is located almost at the foot of a small mountain, so there is an incredible view of the whole village. As soon as Asti and Suri were able to look around the view, horrified, not at Irv's beauty, the reason was different. The village has turned into a nightmare. Houses burned and grass scorched, some huts still smoking. The knight said that the monsters destroyed ERV when the Lord was making arrangements for Lady Belisa's funeral. When the others were attacked by Krasny, their health points dropped to 0 and they disappeared, but Lady Belisa did not. The command and the Lord himself wanted to burn her remains before she turned, but they were too late and went after her and met Asti and Suri, the knight added. Asti didn't know what to answer, but then he said that he assumed after death, "You disappear, not changed that way." The knight answered him that it doesn't matter if you disappeared or resurrected. You're in for a horrible end. If Asti wants to survive, he should train more. The man can see that the farmer doesn't want to end his life like that, but he can't look at him now, for he is too weak. The player thought it was because he was low. The knight told him that's no excuse, because monsters don't care what level you are. If you don't know how to fight, you'll be finished. Asti is a little upset at what he heard, but he understands the man's words. Suri saw that Asti was a little upset and told him not to despair. Just keep practicing well and stay away from fighting for now. Asti thanked him and thought, "Oh, that warrior. He knows how to poke at a man's shortcomings." It seems that the knight in the guise of Leela was also around the whole time and wished Asti good luck. When the team arrived at the castle, there was a lord sitting on the main steps. The knight called out to the lord, and his first question was, did they find his daughter? Lord looked up. A violet color flashed in his eyes. Could it be that he too was turning? The knight promptly replied to the lord that they couldn't find Belisa, but they found people who wanted to meet him. Asti noticed that the lord's level went up. That could mean something. Suri introduced himself and said that there was chaos going on in the world, and they needed the lord's help. Asti was still thinking about the level. How did the lord raise the level to 15th if this village is 10th? The farmer cried, for he still has a single-digit number, and he feels like a burden to the others. The lord doesn't understand why on earth he should protect this world. What will he get in return? After all, he couldn't even save his own daughter. The reason he ended up in this world was because of her. He wanted to live a happy life with Belisa. But Krasny turned his reason for living into a monster. Now his glorious daughter has become a threat to the world, and the Lord doesn't know how to proceed. As expected, Belisa was converted the same way those deer were. The Lord reported that they had already gone through battles with the converts, and that in fact the ruler himself had been converted, but was not without reason. The Lord asked if he remembered Asti as ERV was. Asti remembered the village was bright and beautiful. Addis recalled that Lord Allen was recognized as a sorcerer of light. The village was filled, and Lady Belisa was doing a great job running Evra with her father. As far as the farmer knows, almost all the people of the village respected the Lord's clan. The Lord confirmed his words. But after the Lord's daughter became a vampire, bats are flying all over Evra, says the Lord. And now the Lord himself wields blood magic. Krasny has taken everything from Alan, so he thinks Suri and Asti have bothered him for nothing. His world is shattered. Asti tried to call out to one of the Lord's knights, but the man didn't hear him, so he decided to follow him. Warrior said he would not force it. He would look for other options. Lord announced that before the meeting he would wait on the castle steps for the server to recover, and then ask for his character to be deleted. He doesn't know what exactly went wrong, but he couldn't disappear on his own. The farmer continued to follow the knight, and when they had already gone behind the castle, he decided to call out to him again. Asti asked for one, to teach him the art of wielding a sword. The knight still didn't understand exactly what the guy wanted and kept listening. Asti explained that he is a farmer, so he lacks the stamina to make attacks every second. But maybe he can train by copying other people's skills. Right now his swordsmanship is in its infancy, and his level is too low to copy Suri's skills, so he needs the help of a knight. The man understood him and told him to follow him. He would train Asti. Suri noticed that the farmer was not in sight and decided to go looking for him. The warrior found him behind the castle. At that moment, the player was already training with the knight. The Lord's subordinate showed the farmer a triple combo that could be used against the monsters of ERV village. Asti repeated it over and over again. Suri watched the farmer's training and noticed he was trying his best. Maybe he should let Asti take his chances. The warrior ponders. He and Asti are both NPS. If they teamed up as a group, they wouldn't be able to gain experience points since Suri destroys all monsters in one hit. So for now, the warrior will watch the farmer level up, and if he encounters danger, he will definitely help him. Leela, in the guise of a knight, asked if Suri really thought that. She knows that, however, it's impossible because it doesn't make any sense. Lilu has been working on all the changes for so long, and now she's curious about one question. Will they be able to clean this place up? Lilu wanted to move closer and practically touched Suri's shoulder, but then she abruptly disappeared. The warrior felt someone's presence and turned around to look, but there was no one there. The girl hid and giggled quietly, for the warrior had almost noticed her. She hopes Suri and Asti don't stop there. After all, the warrior and the farmer have many more obstacles ahead of them. Asti was still practicing, and the knight even praised him, but he still had much to learn. The teacher told the farmer that he now needed to practice dodging attacks. The player was not very determined, but was willing to give it a try, so they started. But Asti didn't even notice that the knight had already started his attack. He was caught off guard. The knight went on. The farmer himself had said he didn't want to become a convert, hadn't he? The knight explained that monsters will not lay down their weapons upon seeing the farmer, so he must be strong and careful. Asti caught his thought and set about doing everything he could to defeat the teacher. But suddenly, his opponent's sword was right in front of his face. He was unable to repel the attack with dignity. The knight went at him, and Asti was already on the ground. The teacher was still holding the sword in front of him, showing that Asti had lost, which meant he couldn't defeat the monster yet. The man said that he really appreciated the farmer's bravery, but he was still too weak to fight him on the level. Asti listened to the teacher, and his faith in himself slowly dwindled. Maybe this wasn't what he should be doing. But he took all the will in his fist and stood on his feet. He won't give up that easily. The knight would like to have the ability to raise his level. Then he would definitely save this world, save the Lord and Belisa. But he doesn't have that ability. Asti pondered the teacher's words, meaning he had a great responsibility. Many people disappeared without a trace or were converted. Others have suffered mental wounds from which it is impossible to heal. So the farmer has to get stronger for the sake of all these people because it can't go on like this. But will he succeed? If he were a knight. But he's just an ordinary farmer plucking potatoes and other vegetables. He can't save the world with that kind of work. The player pondered. How could he learn the art of sword and become strong? But suddenly, a brilliant idea came to his mind. It should definitely help him fend off attacks. Potatoes! There's an infinite amount of it. He can use it as an additional weapon. Meanwhile, the teacher is about to attack again. But will he put his sword to the farmer's face this time? Asti started pulling something out of his pocket, Suri watching questioningly. The knight attacked, and in parallel told Asti that he should be able to dodge. If he didn't do it today, then he would stay here and wait for the server update. Suddenly, something flew into the teacher's face and he froze in place. After another second, the sword was in his face. He looked questioningly at Asti. How had he done that? The player stood and smiled. What do you think? The knight asked what happened that Asti threw at him. The player grinned and replied that it was an item from his endless supply. Potatoes. The teacher was dumbfounded, for the lad had defeated him with a common potato. Asti asked him, "What is, sir? It's just his surprise attack skill." Suri has picked up on the fact that Asti doesn't seem to be suited to the sword as a weapon at all. He doesn't have the right fighting skills for it at all. This game is already a few years old. The configuration in it is pretty loose. Due to this, a lot of people have reached the maximum level in the most sophisticated ways. For example, a player who was in cap mode only used a spoon and that was enough. There was also a player who used a toothpick. There were also players who banded together to do crazy things together. And of course, a new update had to be released each time. But bugs from this did not become less, but sometimes they are useful. Suddenly, the knight was approached by his co-worker. He said they had managed to find a survivor. The knight asked where they were. The co-worker replied that they had heard voices from the Batcave. They had managed to hide from Krasny, but the entrance to the cave was blocked with stones. Suri said, "The main thing is that there are survivors in the village, but there may be monsters in the cave, so it is unknown how long they will last." The knight announced that they must rescue them immediately, right now. Asti asked to go with the team and was allowed to, because he would be useful too. Meanwhile, the survivors were sitting in a dark cave. The girl whispered that the NPS soldiers knew that they were here, so they only had to wait for their help. They hope to be rescued before the bats attacked. They don't seem to be noticed yet. The main thing is not to make any sudden movements and then nothing should happen. At least that's how it usually goes, the man said. Suddenly rocks sprinkled, survivors could be swept away. The mice flew up. They began to be pelted with stones, and they fell down one by one. Most of them were already lying on the ground, pinned down by a rock. It gave people a little time. But some of them were able to dodge and were already flying towards the people. People didn't understand why they suddenly took off. A second and the bloodthirsty monsters were already close. The man shouted to everyone to hide immediately. He took rocks and started throwing them at the bats, and he managed to hit a couple converts, but it was like they weren't finishing. There were so many of them that people just didn't have time to shoot them down, and most were just afraid to fight. But this is a fight not for life, but for death. Meanwhile, the soldiers had already arrived at the cave. The knight heard shouts and realized that they were coming from the cave. Suri ran first, for there was an urgent need to rescue people. Asti said that they would go after him immediately. As a team, the work would be faster, for they had people's lives in their hands. The warrior drew nearer, and the cries of the people grew louder and louder. Suri realized, although this was a great opportunity for Asti to practice, the survivors needed to be rescued as soon as possible. So he set to work. The boulders need to be removed first, and Asti would be sure to practice another time. The fighter skillfully removed the boulders using his strength. The path was cleared. The survivors could finally get out, but they had to hurry because there was a whole pack of wild monsters behind them. Suri looked questioningly at the men, for he did not understand why such a rush. The people shouted that everyone should run, for there were too many converts behind them. The warrior immediately reacted, saying that everyone should run for cover and had already activated his power. He quickly struck a blow and illuminated everyone with a bright light. Everyone could feel his strength. It was immense. But the bats merely began to squeak louder and were already looming. They didn't disappear. Suri swung in one more time but could overpower them. Why was this happening? Something had happened that he least expected. And that meant the end of... Turns out the reason was the level. The bats were much higher. Does the rule apply to more than just players? The mice were already so close to the warrior that they could safely attack, and Suri didn't understand what was wrong. How could this be possible? Asti saw how dangerous it was, for Suri could do nothing against the monsters and was about to go for backup. But the warrior shouted that the farmer should by no means come near, for he was too weak. There are too many bats. Asti can't handle them, shouted Suri. Now even the warrior himself doesn't know how to eliminate them, at least for a while, so the farmer must run and as fast as possible. Take the survivors with you and find shelter, shouted the warrior to the farmer. The knights heard a familiar voice, and that meant only one thing. It was Belissa. She is strong, and the soldier told everyone to retreat. Otherwise, this fight will end badly for them. The lord sat on the steps and didn't even realize that near the cave his soldiers and the others were fighting for their lives. Meanwhile, the survivors had already made it to the castle and came to the lord. They asked for his help because without him, the soldiers and the others couldn't handle so many monsters. Asti tried to attack, but it seems all to no avail. This way they will definitely not defeat them. But then what should they do? The farmer did not give up. On the contrary, he decided to use his trump card again, hoping that his trick would work. He pulled out his infinite supply. After all, he was able to dodge the knight's attack last time. Why not try it now? He addressed the potato as a living person, asking for help to stop the critters. It turned out that the farmer had been carrying a frying pan with him all this time. He began to fry something on it. The knight thought he had lost his mind because this was no time to cook and Suri couldn't do it alone. But all Asti did was shove fries into the knight's mouth and tell him to eat them. They'll increase his attack power. The farmer was looked at like he was crazy, but he tried to explain that his terrible sword skills wouldn't help here, and he just had to help somehow. Potatoes can come in handy because they increase strength plus 10 to strength in last 5 minutes. Knight didn't realize there was such a way. Asti told me that he used to eat French fries every day, but didn't think they were healthy at all. It made everyone laugh, but it's not like they didn't know it really worked. Meanwhile, the monsters have already reached the castle. They mercilessly smashed the windows and flew inside. There was no stopping them. The Lord saw that this could not be left like this. Something had to be done. The fries had already worked for Asti and he had some energy. He tried to strike, but somehow his strength didn't change. He remembered the man from the village said he could magnify objects with potatoes. That means he's got a huge potato. One of the knights reported that these monsters made it to the Lord's house. The knights started to panic because they're short on men, they won't be able to handle Belisa, and the farmer only cares about potatoes. A bright red light and the bats began to fly away, and the red color can only come from one person. The Lord has come to the aid of his people. For those who have humanity in them cannot be allowed to be destroyed. Lady Belisa was confused for a second when she saw her father, but then it made her angry. She struck her father. The Lord began to lose his strength and disappear. Is this really the end? The Lord disappeared. Everyone lost hope and mentally prepared for the end. But he sprang up and stood, unshaken, as if he had been struck. Asti confirmed, "The Lord has recovered and upgraded to level 18. Lord starts saying that he is stuck in this game forever, even if he dies. He recovers again with a new level. These monsters have destroyed his village and taken away his family, and he can no longer sit idly by. Lord will help save the world and bring back the old days, when that monster was his sweet daughter." Suri realized when the bats resurrected again, they were getting stronger. That's why he couldn't defeat them. Meanwhile, the Lord was amassing dark forces and told them to kill anyone who gets in his way. The Lord struck a blow to the monsters, and to his daughter as well. Asti saw Belisa losing strength, the number decreasing by the second, and the knight swept up that the Lord had managed to deal damage. But the lady still had strength left and needed to be destroyed before she did. Lord felt terribly sorry for his daughter and for destroying her, but he had no other choice, for she was no longer human. She was a monster. But the Lord was sure she was suffering too, though she looked completely soulless. A second later, the force of blood pierced Belisa's chest. She wriggled in pain. Alan knew someday they would meet again in this game. It's over. Belisa is no longer alive and neither are her monsters, which means that no one is in danger. Asti offered the Lord to go with him and Suri, but the Lord decided that he would stay in Hervé. Alan asked, "Who knows how many people still survived?" The knight replied, in order to save them he needed his power. Suri said then they were counting on them to save the survivors, and Asti wished the Lord to take care of himself. Then the Lord said he dared not detain them any longer. He too wanted to save the world as much as they did. Alan realized that this was the only way he could save himself and his daughter. The farmer was approached by a knight. He wanted Asti to sell him a couple pieces of potatoes that increased strength. Asti no doubt agreed and was about to start cooking, but the knight interrupted him. He said that not long ago he had pointed out the uselessness of the farmer, but now he wanted to apologize, because he had managed to demonstrate his abilities. Thanks to Asti, everyone managed to stay in the fight much longer, and the knight thanked him for that. He also said that his sword skills were getting better and better. The farmer thanked him for such kind words and said he would not charge him for the fries and would make as many as he needed. They said goodbye, maybe not for long. Who knows what adventures await them in the future. Suri and Asti were walking home, back to the newcomer's village. Asti was also very happy because the knight had paid him for the potatoes anyway. His labor was starting to be appreciated, and that was priceless. This was the farmer's first reward, and he was very proud of himself and the work he had done. But Suri reminded him, since they were NPS, the money might come in handy, and told him to hide it in a safe place. The warrior sensed something, as if someone was watching them, and the farmer walked and rejoiced, for he would be able to keep the money. Suri realized that he couldn't even attack low-level monsters now, and the reason is ridiculous. After all, the monsters don't even notice him, they don't sense the danger in him. If you continue like this, the warrior will not be able to fulfill the role of a tank. He feels useless. Asti refused to agree. Instead, he recalled how many times the warrior had saved him. Thanks to him, he was alive. The fact that he was now ignored by the monsters was just a misunderstanding. The world had gone completely mad now. Suri seemed to have forgotten that. Suri thanked him, and if things are really as he says, then we need to get the world in order soon. Still, the warrior senses that someone is watching them. He told Asti to get his gun out so he could be ready. But that's not the kind of place where outlaws can show up. Looks like this is it after all. The man was behind me and told me not to resist, just to hand over the valuables. The other man said that if they obeyed, they would let them go alive. Suri realized that these didn't seem to be simple brigands, so they were NPCs who had volunteered to be brigands.